up my groove today. Been watching gray skies move away. I just don't think that I can lose, and I might just take a cruise and let the sunshine play. Something more, something new, something new.
Ho, 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 everybody. Welcome. We got Rasta Claus here. We got Drew. Drew, it's the final episode of the year before we shut things down. How are you feeling about it?
Good. So it's been a good year, right? I've really enjoyed doing the show. It'll be nice to kind of get a break. We'll be ready to kind of get things back going in Hawaii, but unfortunately, I didn't get the memo about whatever's going on there. But it's a good look for you, man. How are things with you?
I think things are well. Had a fun weekend. Had a couple weekends have been kind of fun, and yeah, a little bittersweet this week with RSM, great tournament, but I'm going to have some withdrawals not watching golf each weekend. Now you might have just solely on football, but luckily it's a fun time of year. It's a busy time of year, and you were just telling me you got a birthday coming up here soon.
Yeah, birthday, Thanksgiving. It's a great time of year. Of course, the weather's transitioning now to where outdoor golf has now turned into indoor golf. So I have a cool little place that opened up about a half mile down the road with new simulators and whatnot. So we'll be tuning the game up for next spring, next summer. Awesome.
Well, glad to hear it. And also got your Lions Thanksgiving game day. That's always a big thing for you. So, but there's not a better birthday present than if we can win some money this weekend. So let's do that for you. And let's recap last week. Jason Kokrak, trainer. How crazy of it? Yeah. What were your takeaways from what you observed?
Well, trainer literally just popped up out of absolute nowhere, right? We can look at it.
Trainer barely know her.
Yeah, exactly. Trainer's parents wouldn't even throw money on him based off of recent form.
No, they wouldn't.
So it was an interesting name, Kokrak, man. If you think of how things ended on Friday evening, right? They couldn't finish their round due to darkness because of the conditions on Thursday. So he comes back out, makes triple bogey to end his round, kind of almost write him off to an extent. But then he by far played the best golf over the weekend, and he kind of went and got it. And really nobody tried to come Sunday, nobody was really trying to track him down. Everybody was kind of playing, and the course was playing tough except for Jason Kokrak. And so the weekend he put together, I don't want to say it was kind of out of nowhere. We saw how he played at the CJ Cup, right? He was terrible. He even had comments that his game, he was thinking about withdrawing based off the state of his game last week, which just kind of shows us how one small, minute change or something mentally, in the swing can kind of click and you can go on and win. So very impressive by Jason Kokrak. I know he wasn't on a ton of people's radars, so hell of a weekend.
Yeah, and that just goes to show how tough golf betting and DFS is. And we want to use that randomness, if you want to call it. That's, Mike at the Cut Line talks so well at that, about the variable of randomness. And so, yeah, we'll get into that. But, yeah, and Kokrak had some great back class, but just came in with terrible form that just was what you mentioned. Even, I saw that too, talked about withdrawing. And then, trainer kind of out of nowhere. And, man, kind of, it looked good. A couple of outrights. I had Wolf, obviously, is on the Wolf pack. Then Mark Leishman, if he would have just made a putt. But, it all didn't work out. But I will say, you mentioned Kokrak's triple on his 36 hole. It's like last hole of the day on his second round. That's actually what sealed me to win that 5K in that showdown slate. Because if he just would have parted, the guy that finished third was a half a point out of second. And so if he just parted, he would have got that par point and passed me up, and I would have lost like $3,000. But because he tripled, it knocked him all the way down and was never a threat. So I really appreciate Kokrak doing that. But
you owe him an edible arrangement or something. Bringing that up, yeah. Speaking of that, let's talk about that. So that was what, Friday? You had a hell of a lineup, right? And you made some Christmas money. What? So when we're going into
a lot of edible arrangements.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it was weird too, because that's kind of one that you're sitting on for a while, knowing that there's still golf to be played when they come back out Saturday morning. So what was the thought process in the lineup that you put together on Thursday night, and what was the sweat like? So, like when you're sitting there on Friday night, do you kind of have an idea that you have a pretty good chance at this, or did things just kind of unfold perfectly for you with the Kokrak triple and other things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love that question. So Friday night, I knew I had an idea, but Kokrak was like 6 under, I think, when the horn sounded on Friday. And so I was like, gosh, okay, I'll need him to back up. Well, not only did he back up, a couple of my guys, just kind of kept it together. It even got a few birdies. And so then you just jump up the leaderboard. I knew I was in with a shot, and then that just makes the sweat fun. But I will kind of say, to answer kind of your first question, if playing Showdown is great, especially when we get strokes gain data. We finally got strokes gain data last week, and so we were able to use it. But I'm not using it in the way every other person is. So what people tend to do, and we talk about this every week, is that people overanalyze strokes gain data, right? Like you say that so well, like you understand, right? I mean, what do you typically say about?
I use it as a crutch. I do.
Exactly.
You just look at it, and when you're looking at these sites and everything's flashing green, and you're like, okay, well, this has to be the right path to go. Well, let's just doesn't. It rarely ever works out that way, right? It just doesn't.
1,000%. And so people look at strokes gain data after round one. They think, gosh, this guy was hitting on approach. Well, it's so well. And so basically, that's just too small of sample size to really then say, well, that's going to carry over to round two. That's the next shot fallacy, is that what we think is going to happen is going to continue to happen, and that's not the case. So we get bad ownership. Like there's no ownership projections in Showdown. But one thing you can kind of do is just assume what Showdowns would be, combined with, okay, here's what people are playing well on approach, and people that's going to carry over to round two. And sure enough, that happens. And so what I really like to do in Showdown, especially in 2 and 3, is I might look a little bit at who might have some upside with ball striking, but especially round two, I like to lean more on my initial model heading into the tournament. And that's how I got a guy like Adam Schenk. Adam Schenk was actually high on my model. Didn't play all that well in round one. Killed it. He won me the tournament in round two.
Yeah.
Same thing with JJ Spawn. But nobody was on him. And that's how you win a GPP. I had 3 guys who were less than 5% owned. And I got there because not that there's strokes gain data in tournament, because of my actual model that I had in going to the tournament. So if you like guys going into the tournament, keep playing them after round one, because it's just too small of a sample size. And so, and I don't know, did you you are so good at recognizing, hey, you just can't buy into the strokes gain data. So, I mean, did you see anything with that lineup or anything within, maybe round one to round two that people just maybe made a mistake on?
Well, yeah, and just to ask you one more follow-up question is there actually value in there not being ownership projections for Showdown? Because you think that if everybody just goes with the strokes gain data, they're going to try to find the guys that are trending and plug them in the lineup. Where you built your model, and that one round is not a large enough sample size to get on or off of somebody. So is there value actually there to where you can't look at ownership projections and kind of overthink it, and you don't look all in on the strokes gain data, and some people might. Is there kind of some value in that when you're looking at building your Showdown lineup?
Yeah, so that's a great point, because if you're not using any sort of game theory method, then you're just blindly playing people, whether it's blindly, hey, this guy is playing well on approach, or this guy's doing whatever, because a projected ownership can be very well predicted going in Showdown lineup. So if you look at a guy, let's say he was a guy in the 10K range, so a well-known golfer, like let's say Scotty Scheffler. Let's pretend that going into the week, he was at 10% owned in regular contests. So contest, round 1 to 4, the most common one we play, he's 10% owned. And if he has a great day on Thursday, well, then he's going to be 20% owned on Thursday. And so you just know that, because people get into that recency bias. Showdown is so good for recency bias. And so then you say, okay, Scotty Scheffler's ownership price is going to be so inflated, but nobody's telling you that. You don't see that on sites because nobody does it. you're just using that game theory in your own mind. And you said, okay, pivot off a guy like that. So yeah, answer, you're right. If you have that game theory perspective, that the showdown is king, and you do get massive value and leverage off that.
Yeah, cause we talk about it all the time. I mean, the recency bias comes up huge when we're talking about one round, and we talk about how that's just not enough. So when you're picking a guy just because he has one bad round, and we see kind of it all the time, somebody rings off a weekend and ends up winning. So when you see that, and you kind of know in your mind, hey, Scotty Scheffler, he was great on approach today. He did all things well. He just didn't putt well. Well, you kind of know when you're trying to think game theory wise in the head of somebody else, when you're picking that showdown lineup, we're trying to think of what the people are thinking and why they're thinking it. So if you kind of know that, hey, people are going to just be recency bias, I'm blacklisting this guy shot 4 over on Thursday, then you know that your model, there's a reason that there's people where they were, and one round's not enough. So I think that's the interesting, because it's just different with showdown, because I do think people are going to look at trends and they're going to play those trends. Well, 18 holes of golf is just not enough. Like, guys can come out and lead the entire tournament in strokes gained approach one day, and then it's just not even close to being that on the second day. That's why we look at these larger sample sizes when we come up with things, and we talk about it all the time. That's why some weeks we play guys that it doesn't work out, but that doesn't mean it was the wrong approach, right? So I think that's interesting, and there's definitely value to be gained with kind of thinking that, and that's pretty much you're kind of in your brain thinking of projected ownership numbers, even though they're a tangible thing you can look at. You kind of are saying, okay, here's how I think other people are thinking. Where can we kind of go from here and to create some value? And I think that's interesting and hell of a lineup, man. And you've been on a heater, some first round leaders, the showdown there on Friday. So what a good way to kind of end this part of the season. Of course, we'll have to cap it off with another good weekend this week.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you saying that. But there's one thing you said so well, is you just said that we're thinking about what other people are doing. And that sounds obvious, but that is exactly what the game is in DFS. It's not a handicapping contest. It's not trying to find the 6 golfers that our handicapping shows we think will win. We're competing against other people, and we'll get into that maybe just in a little second. But I appreciate you saying that. And my wife and I, we went out to brunch thereafter and got bottomless mimosas. That's what DFS can do. That's what DFS can do for you. But I do, because there's one thing I know we'll talk about the course here, I guess right now. But there's one thing I want to get your kind of expert opinion on. Knowing your background. So obviously we have 2 courses here. We have the Plantation and the Seaside course. They're both Bermuda, and everyone is highlighting, got Bermuda is so important. You got to play Bermuda. But Mike at the cut line brought up something very interesting that he talks about, that it's going to be overseeded with possibly some rye in there. That hurts every Bermuda player that is just maybe excels on Bermuda. And so I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but just maybe knowing how some of those grass works and around the green and putting, does that bother you at all? Or what do you think about that?
Well, so it's interesting. So with the overseeding, when we talk about Bermuda, these guys are so good and they play on it enough where we can start to look in the grain of the greens, right? So there's certain grain growing at you, there's certain grain going away from you. When you overseed, those things aren't as visible and easily, like you can't just determine, okay, hey, the grain is definitely growing against me here, or it's definitely down grain. And it's interesting, especially on the greens, but even in the short game shots, right? When you're hitting off of tight lies, determining which way the grain is moving is very, very important. And you can visually see it on a non-overseeded Bermuda green, right? If it's down grain, it's going to be shiny, that shiny color. Where it's into the grain, it's going to be that darker color. So that's immediately in somebody's head when they're a player, they can kind of determine, and it helps with speed. The other thing that's interesting with this week is we're playing 2 different golf courses that are going to have 2 different speeds of greens. And so it's also going to come down to what kind of player can adjust to different speeds of greens. And we see this in other tournaments where they have multiple different golf courses. But that's a great question. I think what it takes is people that have a distinct advantage on Bermuda. I think it kind of evens the playing field a little bit when it's overseeded as it is now.
Oh, that's what I love to hear, because the point of bringing that up is if everybody is talking about Bermuda players around the green, putting, X, Y, Z, well, then everybody's going to get the same players in their lineups. But if we're recognizing, gosh, hey, here's this big unknown variable that it might be overseeded, well, that hurts maybe the skilled players that do so well in Bermuda that you just talked about so well. So, yeah, it's great insight.
Yeah, and it's definitely a thing. Like, we see players that excel on certain grasses, but when we can kind of bring people closer, so when your great putting is not as exacerbated as it would be on a weekly basis on a normal Bermuda greens, then it starts to draw people where we don't necessarily, maybe we don't have to focus on that strokes gained putting as far as Bermuda goes. We can kind of look elsewhere to gain value.
Oh, 1,000%, 1,000%. Well, so I know we have two courses, and the Seaside one is we play, the 3 rounds at. But if you're a golfer and you're standing on the tee box, what do you know about this course that the golfer, what's going through their head, or what's the first thing they see standing on that tee box?
So I think it almost even starts before they stand on the first tee, right? And this is the reason why is this is kind of a mental thing. We know that the Plantation course plays significantly easier than the Seaside course. It's almost the same exact distance. One's a par 72, one's a par 70. So I think when you stand on the tee and say you're playing the Plantation course on Thursday, in your mind, you almost say, I got to get it going. Like, I got to shoot a low number today because this is the opportunity. And sometimes it works out that way. Sometimes it makes you press. Both are starting out with short par 4s, but that mental idea where, especially say you tee off in the afternoon on the Plantation course and you see there's somebody at 8, 9 under, let's say, right? That immediately in your mind, you're like, I have to get a low one today and survive tomorrow, where I think that may be more difficult than the guys that are playing the Seaside course that are like, listen, I can put in a decent 2-3 under round and I'm right there and I have my opportunity tomorrow. And they kind of see the field clearer than they would for the guy that plays in the afternoon. So I think that mental hurdle is kind of significant. Some guys are potentially going to go out there and press and try to make birdies, and they just to keep up. But it's interesting, anytime we talk about the difference for me between the two golf courses is one golf course has significantly more trouble than the other. So the Seaside is definitely going to have more trouble. Conditions, wind wise, it's more susceptible to wind being, on, the water as compared to being inland. But I think that mental hurdle is something that's something to actually think about, when, especially the guys in the afternoon, if you see those scores are super low, you kind of have that feeling in the back of your mind. We have to step on the accelerator early. And if we don't, then we begin to press and bad things can happen and kind of spiral out of control from that point.
Yeah, and you're spot on with bringing up the wind, and Plantation plays easier. Because speaking of showdown, and we might want to know that. But I will say that Jason, who posts a great course preview over at FanShare, brought up, and no one is talking about it. So really shout out to Jason. Nobody's talking about it. Is that since the redesign from the Loves, so Davis Love and his son, that the Plantation played tougher after the redesign. And so it looks like now that there's low wind on, or maybe there's high wind. Forecast change, whatever. But in a showdown where a lot of people are hearing this narrative that the Plantation is easier, well, now we might have this variable that since the redesign, they might play tougher. So I'm going to capitalize maybe on that in some round one showdowns. But that's it. I bring up point. The back data does say the Seaside is tougher, but maybe after the redesign, who knows? One thing we know for certain, though, that Davis Love did make the greens trickier on the Plantation course. That is one thing for certain and without question. But it does run still a little bit slower. But I think he kind of shrank them and made them a little bit tougher, made more undulation. So who knows? Maybe the Plantation plays tougher and you win a GPP by stacking the Seaside guys.
And that's interesting because to your point, everything you read is going to tell you, and this is why it's very interesting to me showdown wise. So the value you can see on a potential week-to-week basis, if you're talking showdown, is the draw, right? So if you know Friday morning is going to be absolutely brutal and Friday afternoon is not, then you can backload the showdown, right? You know that you want to play the guys in the afternoon. But to your point, since the redesign, everybody's going to look at it and say, okay, the plantation course is easier. Why am I not going to play all plantation guys? And to your point, we talk about this. Why are people, let's get in the mind of the guy we're playing against, right? The guy to the left of us at the bar, the guy to the right of us. What are they thinking? Well, they just read that tons of people are talking about this. So is there an advantage going opposite of that? Sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. Definitely could be this week. And again, we don't have tons of data. I mean, it's been 2 years? 2019, I believe, was when Love redesigned it. But I don't know how much. So is there enough value to be on the side of everybody else? Because when these showdowns come out, people are going to fade the guys that are on the seaside, and they're going to play guys on plantation. So to your point, if things have been toughened up, there could certainly be value in try to kind of go the opposite direction of what everybody else is thinking in this circumstance.
1,000%. And it just goes into the next point. I keep bringing up that DFS is not a handicapping contest. And so a lot of people go about creating lineups like it is. So let's pretend that, gosh, okay, my budget allows 6 outright golfers on my card. And so based on value and the number in my budget, I'm going to pick the 6 best golfers that I think can win. And they make their lineups somewhat similar. Here's the value. We have $50,000 as our budget. That's the DraftKings salary. I got to pick 6 golfers that give me the best upside. And so we handicap. And the problem is that there's a lot of ego behind that. And that's a huge problem, because what strokes gain data does, and it's so helpful, it's really helpful in betting, but it gives us information to justify and rationalize our picks, likely in great ways for betting. But that ego really hurts us in DFS because it makes us not see things systemically, that we're part of a system. We're in a larger contest where the real game is, how do I beat these players in my contest, not so much about how do I beat the house. And so the key thing is if the ego hurts us. So real intelligence is knowing that we don't know that much. And so we want to incorporate the variable of randomness. We want to incorporate that more can go wrong for a golfer than can go right. So many DFS players who are great golf handicappers think, well, I'm going to beat every guy or girl in my DFS contest by just out handicapping them. But unfortunately, golf is so hard to predict, we can't out handicap them. Maybe kind of tournament here or there. What we really have to do is find leverage, and that is what gives us success in DFS long term. Because what makes us feel like we're a great handicapper is those justifications and rationalizations based on strokes gain data. So I'm saying you guys follow your great method in handicapping. But in DFS, you got to take that hat off and put in, okay, I got to play the man and not so much the cards, just like poker. And so I just wanted to throw that out there because I'm just seeing now that people are handicapping DFS and they're betting in the exact same way. And that is just going to drive you into the ground and burn money.
Absolutely. It actually doesn't make a ton of sense. Now, excuse me. The other thing we have to take a look at for DFS, we don't necessarily need you to be the outright winner to cash a GPP. And I also think something that people fall into with DFS is the groupthink idea, right? So there's tons of people, and we talk about it. What are people thinking? There's tons of people, hey, this guy is a fantastic golfer. We think he's going to have a good week. We played him on our outright card. There's no reason to play him in DFS. Well, you're playing against a standalone Vegas book when we talk about playing an outright or handicapping golf from that perspective. When we're talking about tens of thousands of lineups, it's a whole different, it's completely separated from what we look at in Vegas. So there's great, and we talk about it quite a bit. There's plays that make a lot of sense as far as outrights are concerned. that don't make a lot of DFS sense. And you see
look at Brooks Koepka last week.
Yeah.
This is the biggest example. FanShare's ownership projections on Brooks were so small earlier in the week, but everybody saw Brooks on everybody's card. And it's like, oh gosh, he must be a great DFS play too. So let's own him. And then Brooks came in as chalk. Brooks was a great bet because of his upside versus the price. At 30-1 Brooks, that's a great play. But he became so highly owned because of that parallel. People are trying to say, well, DFS and betting is similar. Brooks Koepka is a great example last week of what you just talked about.
Yeah, and that falls into that group think, right? Everybody sees what everybody like. We see it all the time on social media platforms. Everybody posts their card. You don't see a ton of people say, hey, and you do a great job of this because you like to put out your player pool, right? And I would be willing to bet a lot of money that you would not be throwing outright bets on those people in that player pool. Now, some you would, certainly, right? Because some you think have the potential to win. But at the same time, you're playing against tens of thousands of other people. You're not playing against one singular book. And just get somebody, if you get 35-1 on Brooks Koepka with the win equity that he does carry, certainly it's something to throw 10, 20 bucks on or whatever it may be, what you do. But that doesn't correlate to DFS, right? It just doesn't. And I think that when people are thinking of building their lineups, you have to draw the line between what makes sense here from an outright, a handicapping, a betting, top 20, top 40, whatever it is, and what makes sense here, right? Like take Denny McCarthy, for example, right? He's actually been a really solid DFS play, but he's had no chance to outright. So you have to figure out where put things in a bucket. Like, so let's say we have two lines. One here is a guy that you like in DFS. One here is a guy you like just straight handicapping golf. Now, some guys fit both molds, but you have to talk yourself through each player. Is this a guy that I'm playing because other people think he is and because the number outright so well? Or is this a guy I'm playing because I actually see the DFS upside and the randomness, and I'm trying to play against tens of thousands of people? Is this gaining me an advantage? Or am I playing Brooks Koepka because everybody's playing Brooks Koepka? Now Brooks Koepka has become chalk, and then when he misses the cut, then it kind of ruins a lot of what you're doing, especially if you're building a player pool and having somewhat similar lineups with top-owned guys that you're rotating around.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about Taylor Gooch last week. Taylor Gooch ended up being the highest owned guy. He came in at 25%.
Thanks to
owned. You. Yeah, gosh. And so we said, hey, it's time to sell on Taylor Gooch. Could Taylor Gooch won the tournament? Sure. But he was a terrible DFS play. Because what leverage are you really creating at 25%? Yes, he could have won the tournament, and that would have worked out. But we're thinking of like long term. You have to be consistent week to week to week in DFS. And again, just like you said for randomness, more can go wrong for a golfer than can go right. So if you're buying into 25% own on a Taylor Gooch, where we know that more can go wrong, that is so risky. You think it's a safe play because everyone's talking about him. We've seen his current form. We think, he's had a couple top tens, almost won a couple tournaments. So we think, gosh, he's safe. But over the long haul, if you invest on guys that own, that is so risky. It's like rostering 6K guys. That is so risky. And yeah, there's good chalk and bad chalk, and we know how to, kind of process that. But yeah, you're exactly right. We got to really be mindful within ourselves of why am I playing this guy, or why shouldn't I play this guy? Well, before we move on to kind of run down the board, anything else, Drew, that you have?
Yeah, just one more thing to point out. It's just when you play a guy like that, the margin of error is so razor thin that you're kind of doing yourself a disservice. And you said it best last week. If there's anybody in the Taylor Gooch fan club, it's certainly you. You've been on him for a long time. But the thing that I respect about you and that I think other people do as well is you are going to be upfront, honest, and say when you think that you should get off a guy, I don't care if that's your guy or not, right? Because things change, things fluctuate. If you're setting yourself up for a razor thin margin of error, and yeah, it may work out, it may not, but it's too risky to an extent where it kind of hurts everything else that you're doing in a particular week, where again, credit to you for saying, hey, let's get off of the guy. It's not like he had a bad week, but at the ownership that he was at, it just wasn't the right DFS play last week. And to be honest with you, it's become to the point where it might not be even a good handicapping outright pick at this point. His odds have gotten to that point.
Yeah, and I'll say that, he was still in my player pool, but I went very underweight on him compared to the rest of the field. Underweight went in the sense of he was still in lineups that were contrarian, that had guys that were big in my player pool, like a Mark Leishman. But so many, because I'll make 150 lineups. And so he was in only, I think it was like 20 of those 150. So I had all those other lineups kind of without them, very underweight. But so many people, if you just make 5 lineups and you include Taylor Gooch into 3 or 4 of them, well, then you're overweight on them. And that's when it's a really bad DFS play. So
quick question. One other quick question for you, just because I think some people might want to hear this. So in your 150 lineups, right, when you are putting these lineups together, what's the process look like, right? So I know that you set your player pool and you'll have 15 guys, maybe, just to throw out a number. I believe it's somewhere around there. Maybe a few more, maybe a few less. So when you're going through each individual lineup, what's the process, right? I saw last week you were heavy Cam Smith, which was fine, right? But so are you basically taking this group of players and percentage-wise in them, and then trying to mix and match in between your player pool? What's the process look like when you're building these lineups? Because building 150 lineups isn't for the week, and two, like what do you like when you're building these? What do you think about? Like, I know you have your player pool. I know that you have it down to this, but I think for me personally, and I think other people, what's that process kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a good question. And so first I'll say, if you can mass enter, so if you can do 150, it does give you an edge, because the vast majority, I'm going to say like 75% of other people in that contest are not entering that many lineups. But it also gives you extend your player pool. But first of all, but if you do that, you have to make your player pool size the right amount. So many people make their player pool size way too large. I would say everybody that's listening, likely their player pool is too big. So for 150 lineups, I think my player pool was around 40 guys total for 150. And I know that people who make 20 lineups, their player pool is 35. So you can just see how the different, you want a very, very tight kind of player pool. And so then when you kind of have it narrowed down to the right number, then you assign percentages of the golfers that you feel like is the best play based on, some of the data, some of the game theory, some of the ownership. And so then you do kind of like a pyramid style salary or percentage allocation. So, your top guy should be anywhere between 60 to 100% owned. So let's just say that, Mark Leishman and Bez, I think, and Cam were all 1, 2, 3. Let's just say I wanted to use Mark Leishman. I was really confident in him. I'm going to put him 80% in my lineups. Then I'm going to use Bez and Cam, and they're going to be 50. And then you're going to work your way down, and the player pool kind of expands as it gets down to the 15% range. I have the majority of my golfers in my player pool are 15%. That's because all the way up top, you have like a guy like Mark who's in 80% of your lineups. But then it kind of like shrinks as it comes below. So the guys in the low 6K range, obviously I'm not going to have, the majority of tournaments, a high allocation of ownership percentage into them, because 6K guys are risky. But so that's the way. So think of it as the pyramid, and you want guys that, if I like Mark Leishman, he pops in my models, the strokes gains back it up, the handicapping, the process backs it up. And then you say the game theory aspect is only going to be 10% owned or 13% owned. Well, that says, green light, he's a great play. He needs to be 80% up there. And then to kind of work your pyramid down. Again, if you could do 150 lineups, there's a big advantage of that, but just make sure you stay within your means. But if you do that consistently, there's an advantage there. That's a good question.
No, and I think to your point, people tend to have a bigger player pool, right? And especially when we're talking about setting, a good amount of lineups, what I think happens is people sway away from their player pool, and then they just start clicking names, right? We're on lineup 96 and we just start clicking names and we're thinking, okay, we're being different. We're being different. Well, you built your player pool for a reason. Let's stay with what we're thinking and go off of that. So I think that's probably very beneficial to other people listening, because again, for me, when I'm building that many lineups, it's easy to just start, straying away from the work that we've done to create this player pool, and then just start clicking names. Okay, we're done with 97, 98, 90, you know what I mean? And you just start clicking away. So yeah, that's good insight. Thanks for sharing that, man.
Yeah, great question. When speaking of clicking names, let's go to the board right now and start clicking names. So we're we don't have to spend too much time on it. We don't have much time, but let's just do the 9K and above. So 9K the bottom, that's Adam Scott all the way up to Scotty. Anybody kind of you're leaning on a Monday night right now?
I mean, it's hard for me to look away from Webb Simpson in the course history, right? And Webb Simpson hasn't played a ton, but he's done nothing but top 10 at this golf tournament. So when we're looking at the top, the top range of things, you're looking at him and kind of Scotty Scheffler. I do think that there may be some potential value in playing Scotty Scheffler with the way that he ended last week. But him and the only other guy that I'll throw out, and I don't know if this is even below, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, is Corey Connors in the 9K range. He's somebody I like. He had a 10th here last year. Ball striking numbers are fantastic. Drives the ball pretty accurately. Second in strokes gained off the tee in the last 24 rounds. So he's a guy I like. He hit 70% of his fairways, right? And so that's going to, depending, it doesn't matter what course he plays. You hit 70% of your fairways. You hit some greens. I think Corey Connors is a solid play this week.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, great stuff. And I'm interested to see what the ownership projections come out on Scotty. I think there's going to be a little bit of a recency bias with them because how people are already, are talking about yesterday how he choked it away. And so I'll be interested to see what the be on Scotty. Louis interesting. I soon we're going to see a regression with Louis. Don't tell BK that we're going to see it, unfortunately. But does it happen here? I mean, maybe not. But I also really like Cam. We know Cam doesn't hit a lot of fairways, not great off the tee. But one thing he's great with his wedges and putting. I played a lot of him, last week, and he missed so many within 10 feet. I don't think that happens again. I think Cam's going to make a lot of birdies. English is interesting. Not sure what to do with Connors. Connors is an ownership play. Low own, going to play.
I agree.
High own, going to fade. I'm going to say Gooch. This is not a Gooch course. You have to be accurate off the tee. Gooch is not accurate at all. But I want to get your opinion on Kisner. I have a lot to say about Kevin Kisner, but I want to first get your opinion. Everyone's putting him in an outright card. 50-1 is a great number on him. But I've seen 35, and people are playing 35-1 Kisner. What do you think about Kevin?
Not me. Yeah. Listen, Kevin Kisner, does this golf course potentially fit everything that he does well? Yeah, certainly. But I'm not willing to just ride the idea that Kevin Kisner can show up and win this golf tournament. The form hasn't been there once. It hasn't been there. Recently. 50-1's a nice number as an outright. He's going to be a chalky play, I think, as far as DFS is concerned. I don't plan on having any Kevin Kisner this week. Again, it kind of goes into the group thing. Kind of everybody seems to be on Kevin Kisner. And it's like, to me, it's why. Why are you everybody in on Kevin Kisner? And I don't think that the reasoning behind it, I don't think the value's there, right? I think that you could give me reasoning, but is it legit reasoning why I should be playing Kevin Kisner? For me, I'm off of Kevin Kisner this week. He could certainly prove me wrong, but I don't have enough to feel confident with the play of Kevin Kisner, especially when we know he's more than likely going to be pretty heavily owned.
Yeah.
What about you?
50-1. I don't mind taking a bite
Sure.
at 50-1, but in DFS, we're likely going to get something that I don't think I've ever seen before, and that's chalk guy who's actually coming in one of the worst in the field. So what I mean by that, in my model over the last 24 rounds, and my model ranks up off the tee, ball striking, fairway, green regulation, and some proximity and approach numbers, Kev Kisner ranks 125th in the field in my model. He's in the 9K. He's 9,200, and he's going to be chalk. I don't think I've ever seen that before. So that just screams maybe the worst bad chalk play out of all DFS. Now, can he win? Sure. He can be a top 10 machine here. But over the course of a DFS career, maybe playing a guy in this spot like Kevin Kisner is just a bad play. Betting outright 50-1, yeah, there's great value there. But Kisner may be one of the worst DFS plays that I ever seen. And can he win and can he do well? Yes. But I'm not saying the worst play this week. We're saying worst DFS play. If you play guys that are in this scenario with these metrics week in, week out, you're going to just burn money in DFS. So just consider that. But he's a bad DFS play.
Form, he's a 7K player. I mean, that's it. It's that simple. I mean, you look at like if we follow, and this is the interesting part of what we do here. If we follow strokes gain data, there's absolutely zero reason anybody would play Kevin Kisner this week. Absolutely none. I mean, everything across the board, to your point, is just not good. So this is kind of the opposite of where like people are a crutch on strokes gain. This is living kind of in the past and hoping for something to kind of come to fruition where at 9,200, which is overpriced, the form's not there. It doesn't make much sense to me. It just doesn't.
Yeah, and you're just doing it on course history and narrative that I know he's not a Sea Island boy. I think he has a house there, but he doesn't live there. But anyway, and so I'm going to go down. So Keegan's really interesting. There's 3 guys in the 8K range that I really, really like. There's actually 4, and one of them's your boy, but I'll let you talk about him. But Justin Rose is going to be a big play for me. I'm want to look at ownership, but he's going to be a big play with me. Mackenzie Hughes is going to be on my outright card. Rose likely too. This Mackenzie Hughes, I think he won here. And then my favorite play, depending on ownership, but as a Monday night, my favorite play is Joel Damon. Joel Damon won on Coastal Course in the win. Bermuda guy. Speaking of
wonderful
models,
Sunday last week too, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. If we like guys coming from a Sunday, he vaulted all the way up on the leaderboard. He ranks 4th in my model. He ranks over the last 24 rounds. He ranks 9th in ball striking. He ranks 20th in fairway finding. Ranks 18th on approach. And from the one of the most important proximity distances, from 150 to 175, Joel Damon ranks 1st. So it's everything is saying to play Joel Damon. And also on my trend model, he ranks number 1. He's coming in the best. There's a little worry that he's peaked and he might come down to earth, but if he can kind of hold it together, Joel Damon is likely going to be my favorite play, and he could be my Mark Leach. He could be one of my highest owned guys.
I think it's weird with Joel Damon too, because I feel like Joel Damon is a super under the radar, just good player. And I don't think like the DFS community is maybe necessarily caught up to that. When you look at with projected ownership numbers for him week to week, I just think that he's somewhat undervalued. And I know he had a great week, as far as the Sunday last week, but there's always some value in Joel Damon. I'm with you on Keegan Bradley. The other guy I'll mention is Chris Kirk. I just think Chris Kirk sets up perfectly for this golf course. He's 11 strokes gained tee to green. He's had a top 20 here last year. He's just a guy that he may be. I'll keep an eye on Chris Kirk because I feel like Chris Kirk has become kind of a popular play recently. But in the 8K range, him and Keegan Bradley are probably the 2 guys that I'm looking at.
Yeah, I knew you were going to talk about Kirk, and I'm glad you did.
I love Chris Kirk, man. I don't know why. It's just my boy.
Well, he's a ball striker, and you're a PGA Tour pro. You appreciate that. So I'm going to talk about Matt Kuchar. We're seeing signs of life from Matt Kuchar. So Matt Kuchar obviously plays well here from the area. Wildlife Country Club is a course comp. He's won there. With the Shriners, Kuchar ranked 3.3 or scored 3.3 on approach. Had a beautiful 22 as a game theory play in Mayakoba when he was 6K. Kuchar has a heartbeat. Coming to a place where he plays well, I don't think he's going to be that highly owned. 7,900. I love Charles Howell right below him. We see the resurgence.
Past winner too.
Yeah, and the past winner. Matt Wallace, even though he's coming off a miscut in Dubai, and there's a time change. This is a Matt Wallace course. We're really like Matt Wallace. And the last guy I'm going to mention in this kind of 7K range is Aaron Rai. Aaron Rai trending very, very well. Played well last week. one thing, a lot of people don't have a lot of backstrokes gain data on Aaron Rye. So, I wrote him up on a FanShare article 2 weeks ago. So I may get this wrong because it's not in front of me. But one thing we know about this course is hitting greens and regulation is key. Aaron Rye was one of the best on the European Tour the last 3 years in doing that. So consider that. He actually ranks 21st in my model. He ranks 12th in finding fairways. Aaron Rye is a great play. I really like him. What else in the 7K range do you like?
Yeah, so a guy that, again, he kind of breaks models. Like, we see him all the time. I do kind of like Patrick Rodgers this week. And the win equity is clearly not there. The stats are there. For me, it's more of how he's trending recently. So you look back last 5, last 10, the ball striking numbers have been good. He's right about 3.5 strokes gained total. He's one of the guys to me, and there's a few of them, right? Keegan Bradley's usually a model breaker. There's certain guys that kind of find their way up there every week. I do kind of like the fit here for Patrick Rodgers this week. And then I'm going to go back to the bottom with Denny McCarthy. And I mentioned him earlier. DFS-wise, he's been really, really solid for me. He has 2 top 20s, 2 top 15s in his last 2 starts. If you're putting him at the base of 7,000, I think there's value in taking Denny McCarthy. And we talked about the overseas, but he's 6th in strokes game out of Bermuda in the last 24. So he's a guy I'm looking at the bottom of the 7K range. So Patrick Rodgers. And again, we'll see with Patrick Rodgers when we get closer to it. There's actually, and I know we don't have time to talk about a lot of people, there's a lot of value in that 7K range this week.
Oh, 1,000%. And
Yeah.
let's get into the 6K range where there's a lot to talk about. First guy I'm going to talk about is Zach Johnson. Mentioned it on Twitter on Saturday or Sunday.
He did.
He played well, he played very well at a course that does not suit his game last week. Now he gets to a course where he actually lives on the course, has great course history, like Zach Johnson. Matt Neesmith. And we talked a lot about last week in his ball striking stats. I want to point out Andy Lack brought up this information. The SEC Championship is played here in one other college tournament that I'm sure you all know the name of it. It's the something Cup. Matthew Neesmith's results is like top 5, top 5, top 5, top 5, top 5. And his 2 tournaments here in his course history, he has like 2 top 20s. Matt Neesmith loves this place. Backed it up in college. And
good week last week too, right?
Yeah, a good week last week. Matt Neesmith is going to be a good play. One of my favorite plays is Russell Knox. He's great. Speaking of modeling, models out the 5th best in just everything, so remember that. Been on Hudson Swafford a while, so I'm going to keep rolling with him.
Let's go, baby.
Yeah, he kind of models out really well. Davis Thompson is another guy that Andy mentioned. Georgia boy, has great course history here. Back in the college days, and I'm going to go all the way. Looking at the wrong thing. Don't want to miss out on these 6K guys. Rory Sabatini, Davis Riley, Vincent Whaley, Nick Hardy, Bronson Burgoon, and the last guy is Sung Kang. Those are my 6K guys that are going to be in my pool. Who do you like it?
Yeah, so Zach Johnson was in my pool as well, but I'm going to go with Kramer Hickok, which had a very solid week last week. And really, like, when I get to these AK range, I like to kind of narrow that the form to 8 rounds instead of the normal 24 I do. And so he's 3rd in strokes gained total in the last 8. Bermuda's his best surface. And then Cam Young, which is at 6,800. He's a Korn Ferry Tour guy. The numbers are there. He had a 2nd at Sanderson. So between Zach Johnson and Kramer Hickok and Cameron Young, those are kind of the 3 guys that I'm focusing on right now.
All right. Well, we went through that really quickly. I know this has been one of our longer ones, but I just want to say, Drew, if there's nothing else, this is the last show before Thanksgiving. If you're stateside, and Christmas, if you're celebrating, however you might celebrate, I appreciate you, Drew. I appreciate how you treat people, how you interact with people. You do a great job with that. I appreciate your insight and who you are. And for our listeners, we're very thankful. And speaking of Thanksgiving, want to give thanks for how you interact with us, for how you listen and how you support, whether it's the likes and the retweets or just sending us a message saying, hey, great show. We really, really appreciate that. There's nothing better than this community. We got a lot of good people here. So no better time than Thanksgiving to give some thanks. Anything else, Drew, before we send off for the final time of 2021?
Yeah, to your point, lots to be thankful for. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Again, all the support. Rob, appreciate you. I look forward to the show every week. And I just hope everybody has a happy and safe holiday season, and we'll see you here sooner rather than later.
That sounds good. And everybody wish Drew a happy birthday. All right, we'll see you
Thanks,
later.
man.